When people think of Peter Butterworth, they often remember the gentle, slightly bewildered face that appeared in so many carry-on films. He was rarely the leading man. He wasn't the glamorous hero. And he wasn't usually the loudest character on screen. Yet behind that familiar smile was one of the most extraordinary stories in British entertainment. Before becoming one of Britain's best-loved comedy actors, Peter Butterworth survived being shot down during the Second World War, endured years as a prisoner of war, took part in some of the most famous escape attempts in history, and worked alongside men whose stories would later inspire films such as The Great Escape. His life was a mixture of courage, resilience, comedy and remarkable determination. Today we're taking a look at the life and times of Peter Butterworth, from his wartime adventures to his unforgettable career in British film and television. And some of the facts you're about to hear are far more incredible than anything that happened in a carry-on movie. Early life. Peter William Shorrocks Butterworth was born on the 4th of February, 1919 in Bramhall, Cheshire, England. Growing up during the years between the First and Second World Wars, Britain was changing rapidly. The world of cinema was exploding in popularity, radio was becoming the center of family entertainment, and a generation of young people dreamed of adventure. Peter was one of them. From an early age he developed a fascination with performance and entertainment, although nobody could have predicted the extraordinary path his life would take. As a young man he displayed a natural sense of humor and a likable personality that would later become his trademark on screen. However, before acting could become a serious consideration, world events intervened. In September 1939, Britain entered the Second World War. Like many young men of his generation, Peter answered the call. Joining the war effort. Butterworth joined the Royal Navy and served in the Fleet Air Arm. At the time, naval aviation was one of the most dangerous branches of military service. Pilots operated in extremely hazardous conditions, often flying missions over enemy territory and hostile waters. In 1940, during operations in the Mediterranean, Peter's aircraft was shot down. It was a life-changing moment. Captured by German forces, he became a prisoner of war. For many people, this would have been the end of the story. For Peter Butterworth, it was only the beginning. Life as a prisoner of war. Peter spent much of the war in German prisoner-of-war camps. Conditions were difficult, uncertainty was constant, and prisoners were always searching for ways to maintain morale. One of the camps where Butterworth was held would become famous throughout history, Stalag Luft III. Many viewers will recognize that name from the legendary film The Great Escape. But unlike the actors who portrayed prisoners on screen years later, Peter Butterworth had actually lived through the experience. And here's one of the most remarkable stories connected to his life. When producers were casting The Great Escape in 1963, Butterworth was reportedly considered too tall and healthy-looking to play a prisoner of war. The irony was extraordinary. Many of the famous Hollywood stars portraying prisoners had never experienced captivity, while Peter Butterworth had genuinely been there. It's a story that perfectly captures the strange twists and turns of his life. The escape attempts. Peter wasn't simply sitting and waiting for the war to end. Like many prisoners, he became involved in escape activities. The prisoners at Stalag Luft III constantly looked for opportunities to outwit their captors. Tunnels were dug. Documents were forged. Disguises were created. And escape plans became almost a daily obsession. Butterworth participated in several escape attempts. Although none led to permanent freedom, they demonstrated enormous courage. Every escape attempt carried severe risks. If caught, prisoners could face punishment, confinement and increased restrictions. Yet many continued trying. Their determination became one of the most inspiring chapters of wartime history. Another important figure Butterworth met in captivity was Talbot Rothwell. At the time, neither man could have imagined that years later they would help shape British comedy. Rothwell would go on to become one of the most important writers of the carry-on films. The friendship and experiences formed during those difficult years would unexpectedly influence British entertainment after the war. The Wooden Horse Connection. One of the most famous escape stories from the war involved a remarkable plan known as the wooden horse. Prisoners concealed tunneling operations beneath a gymnastic vaulting horse that was carried into the exercise yard each day. The story later became a best-selling book and a successful film. Peter Butterworth was closely connected to many of the men involved in these famous escape activities. The reality of prison camp life was often far more dramatic than the films inspired by it. These wartime experiences left a lasting impact on him, yet despite everything he endured, friends and colleagues later described him as warm, gentle and remarkably cheerful. Perhaps humor became one of the ways he processed some of the darkest years of his life. Returning to civilian life. When the war ended in 1945, millions of servicemen faced the challenge of rebuilding their lives. Peter Butterworth was no exception. After years of conflict and captivity, he returned to civilian Britain. The country was recovering from war, rebuilding cities, and looking toward a new future. Entertainment became increasingly important. People wanted laughter. They wanted optimism. And they wanted performers who could help them forget the hardships of the previous decade. Butterworth began pursuing acting professionally. Like many actors, his early years involved hard work, small parts and persistence. Success did not arrive overnight. But Peter possessed something producers valued enormously. He was reliable. He was versatile. And audiences instantly liked him. Breaking into film and television. Throughout the 1950s, Butterworth gradually built an impressive career. He appeared in numerous films and television productions. Unlike major stars who became known for a single iconic role, Peter developed a reputation as one of Britain's finest character actors. A character actor is often the secret ingredient that makes a production memorable. These performers create believable worlds and memorable supporting characters. Butterworth excelled at exactly that. His distinctive appearance, expressive face and impeccable comic timing made him instantly recognizable. Audiences might not always remember the character's name. But they remembered Peter Butterworth. By the late 1950s and early 1960s, British cinema was entering one of its most successful periods. And Peter Butterworth was about to become part of one of the most successful comedy franchises in British film history. The Carry On series. Enter the Carry On films. By the late 1950s, British comedy was booming. Producer Peter Rogers and director Gerald Thomas had struck gold with a series of low-budget comedy films that became known simply as the Carry On movies. What began as a modest comedy series soon became a British institution. The films featured a familiar group of performers who returned again and again, creating a unique sense of family that audiences loved. Peter Butterworth became an important member of that family. Unlike stars such as Sid James, Kenneth Williams, Barbara Windsor or Joan Sims, Butterworth rarely played the central character. Instead, he specialized in supporting roles that often stole scenes through understatement, timing and sheer likability. He became one of those actors audiences were always pleased to see. His first Carry On appearances. Peter's first appearance in the Carry On series came in 1960. From that point onward he became a regular fixture. Over the years he appeared in 16 Carry On films. These included, Carry On Constable, Carry On Regardless, Carry On Cruising, Carry On Cabby, Carry On Jack, Carry On Spying, Carry On Cleo, Carry On Cowboy, Carry On Screaming, Carry On Don't Lose Your Head, Carry On Doctor, Carry On Up the Khyber, Carry On Camping, Carry On Again Doctor, Carry On Henry, and Carry On Abroad. That list alone demonstrates how valued he was by the production team. For more than a decade, Peter Butterworth was a familiar and dependable presence within one of Britain's most successful comedy franchises. What made him different? One reason audiences loved Butterworth was that he rarely seemed to be acting. Many comedians relied on exaggerated performances. Kenneth Williams had his famous expressions and vocal flourishes. Charles Hawtrey had his eccentric mannerisms. Sid James had his unmistakable laugh. Peter Butterworth's approach was different. His humor often came from sincerity. He played characters who seemed completely genuine, even when surrounded by complete madness. That contrast made him incredibly funny. His reactions often became the joke. A confused look. A nervous smile, a perfectly timed pause. These simple techniques turned ordinary moments into memorable comedy. Carry On Screaming. Of all his Carry On appearances, many fans regard Carry On Screaming from 1966 as one of the finest. Today it is often considered one of the greatest films in the entire series. The horror parody showcased many of the cast at their best. Butterworth's contribution demonstrated exactly why he fitted the series so perfectly. The film remains a favorite with modern audiences and continues to attract new fans decades after its release. Many viewers discovering Carry On films for the first time often find themselves drawn to Peter Butterworth's understated style, beyond the Carry On films. Although many people associate him primarily with Carry On, Peter's career extended far beyond those famous comedies. Throughout the 1950s, 60s and 70s he appeared in a huge variety of productions. He worked in comedy, drama, war films, television sitcoms, and feature films. His versatility made him one of Britain's busiest character actors. Producers knew they could trust him to deliver exactly what a role required. He became one of those dependable faces who seemed to appear everywhere. And audiences were always pleased when he did. Television success. Television was becoming increasingly important during the 1960s and 1970s. As more households acquired television sets, demand for reliable performers grew enormously. Butterworth adapted perfectly. He appeared in numerous television productions and sitcoms. His warm personality translated naturally to the small screen. Viewers welcomed him into their living rooms week after week. Unlike some actors who struggled to move between film and television, Butterworth seemed equally comfortable in both worlds. This flexibility helped sustain a long and successful career. His marriage to Janet Brown. Away from the cameras, Peter enjoyed a successful marriage to actress and impressionist Janet Brown. Janet became famous throughout Britain for her impressions, particularly her portrayal of Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. The couple were well known and well respected within the entertainment industry. Friends often described them as a strong partnership built on mutual support and affection. While Peter rarely sought publicity, colleagues frequently spoke of his kindness and professionalism. He was known as someone who was easy to work with and well liked by cast and crew alike. In an industry not always known for stability, Peter and Janet's relationship became one of the enduring success stories of British entertainment. A man who never boasted. Perhaps one of the most fascinating aspects of Peter Butterworth's life is how little he spoke about his wartime experiences. Many actors would have built an entire public identity around surviving prison camps and daring escape attempts. Peter rarely did. In interviews and public appearances, he was generally modest about his achievements. To many people who worked with him, he was simply Peter. The friendly actor. The dependable colleague. The funny man from the Carry On films. Only later did many fans fully appreciate just how extraordinary his wartime story had been. An ironic Hollywood story. One story perfectly captures the strange twists of Butterworth's life. As mentioned earlier, he was reportedly rejected for a role in The Great Escape because filmmakers believed he looked too healthy and too well fed to portray a prisoner of war. The irony remains astonishing. Peter had genuinely endured years of captivity. He had lived through the events that inspired such films. Yet Hollywood preferred actors who merely looked the part. It remains one of the most remarkable casting stories in film history. And one that fans still discuss today. The final years. During the 1970s, Peter continued working steadily. Although the golden age of the Carry On films was beginning to fade, he remained a respected and familiar figure within British entertainment. Audiences still enjoyed seeing him appear on screen. His reputation as one of Britain's finest character actors remained secure. By this stage he had spent decades entertaining audiences. Whether in cinemas or on television, Peter Butterworth had become one of those rare performers whose presence instantly created warmth and familiarity. His death. Tragically, Peter Butterworth's life came to an end on the 16th of January, 1979. He was just weeks away from his 60th birthday. He died from a heart attack in Coventry, Warwickshire. News of his passing saddened colleagues and fans throughout Britain. The entertainment industry had lost one of its most dependable and beloved performers. Yet his work lived on. And continues to live on today. His legacy. More than 4 decades after his death, Peter Butterworth remains one of the most fondly remembered actors associated with British comedy. New generations continue to discover the carry-on films. Classic television channels continue to broadcast his work. Film historians continue to tell the remarkable story of his wartime experiences. His life reminds us that some of the funniest people often possess the most extraordinary histories. Behind the gentle smile and comic timing was a man who had survived war, captivity and enormous hardship, yet he emerged with kindness, humor and optimism intact. That may be his greatest achievement of all. Conclusion. Peter Butterworth's story is far more than the story of a comedy actor. It is the story of courage, resilience, friendship, and a life lived with remarkable grace. From a young man born in Cheshire in 1919, to a wartime prisoner who defied the odds, to one of Britain's most recognizable character actors, his journey was truly extraordinary. For many fans, he will always be remembered as one of the familiar faces of the carry-on films. But behind those memorable performances was a man whose real-life adventures were every bit as fascinating as anything Hollywood could invent. And perhaps that is why Peter Butterworth continues to be remembered with such affection. Not simply because he made people laugh, but because he showed that even after experiencing the darkest moments of history, it is still possible to bring joy to millions. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this look at the life and career of Peter Butterworth, please consider subscribing for more stories from the golden age of British film and television. And let us know in the comments which Peter Butterworth performance is your favorite. Until next time, thanks for watching.